Hey guys, today I'm talking about trauma and why I think this may affect the children of family vloggers. Hey guys, Sergio here, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about trauma and how that can kind of link to some of the situations children in family vloggers' lives may experience. I'm not saying they all do or they all will, I'm just putting it out there as something that crossed my mind, and so I thought I would share it with you all. So there's going to be seven parts to this. I will try and break it down in the description with timestamps for you, so you can skip through and watch certain parts again if you feel you want to. So let's start off with trauma. When we're looking at trauma, we need to come up with a shared description of how I am viewing trauma for the purpose of this video. And I'm using a quote from an education paper produced by Harvard. And I'm going to read it. I've got notes because I don't want to get this wrong. So, trauma is an experience of serious adversity or terror, the emotional or psychological response to an experience. So for the purposes of this video, when I say the word trauma, that is what I am referring to, that explicit definition. There are other viewpoints on trauma, there are various other things, but this is the one description that I'm going to be working on today. So, the second thing that we need to realise and understand is that trauma is totally subjective and relative. What I view as traumatic, you might not. What someone else views as traumatic, I might not. It's so subjective and relative. So you have to understand it in the context of it. Something that traumatised me as a child isn't necessarily going to traumatise me as a teenager, as an adult. But something that happened, say, when I was a teenager wouldn't have traumatised me as a child, but now is traumatic because I've grown up through and past it. I'm hoping that makes sense. It's really important to realise that we can't just say this is a traumatic experience, because for some people it may be, for some people it might not, and that's a really important line to draw, because we can say, right, this situation 100% traumatic, but then somebody else comes along and goes, I mean, it upset me, but I'm not traumatised. So it's really important that we know that it is subjective and it's relative, and it needs to be taken in context to the situation at large. Also need to be aware that when something is recognised as a trauma, it affects the entire body. It's not just I feel a bit sad. There will be psychological, physiological responses to that trauma. Okay. So, for example, an injury. If I fall over and skin my knee as a child, I could be very upset and traumatised by it and never want to return to the playground. If I fall over as an adult and skin my knee, I'm just a little bit embarrassed that people have seen me fall over. So it's very much a case of realising that as a child is not going to stay with me till I'm an adult. Something more in depth, say some violence you witnessed, you were in an accident in a car, you had some sort of overwhelming experience, say a bereavement in the family, that can continue from childhood all the way through to adulthood. And that is something that is really important that we understand, that it can stay with you for many years. There's a lot of work being done into trauma-based mental health situations, things like dissociative identity disorder, PTSD. All of these things have bases in trauma because they change the way the body and the brain react to an experience. It's also important to realise that trauma happens before we think. It's a reaction. You don't see something and think, right, this is traumatic. Okay, now I'm traumatised. Before you can even process that thought, it becomes traumatic. And because it is such an instant reaction, that's why it's different from person to person to person, because it will depend on what experiences they've had, what emotions they've already been exposed to, how they've been supported or not supported. So all those things will have an impact. And it is said that there are 3 pillars of trauma. So you have Shame. Shame is a big one. If you are embarrassed, if you are upset, if you are called out in some way, that can be very traumatic. Next one is fear or terror. So if there is something that scared you, made you worry, made you fearful, even if it's something that happened and only a couple of weeks later you start getting that fear, it's still that traumatic response. And the third is injustice. So if you have had an injustice done to you, if you have been hurt by someone, either emotionally or physically, if you have been betrayed by someone, if you have been, any sort of injustice has been served against you. And again, this is subjective and relative, so what I view as an injustice, you might not, vice versa. Those are the 3 pillars of trauma. Okay, so the second part we're going to talk about is stress. Now, stress can be positive and healthy, and it can be a way that you respond to a situation, say moving house, a new job, things like that. However, it can also be negative. So I'll pop these examples up on the screen. These are from Joining Forces for Children. I apologise, I'm looking at my notes, I don't want to get anything wrong. So you can have positive response to stress. This is a normal response. Examples of this: first day at work, first day at a new school. These are stressful, but you react to them, you learn from them, and each time you experience it, it makes you more ready to deal with it the next time, because you have taken in the information and you have learned from it, you've grown from it. So there's positive stress. So you can have tolerable stress, which is obviously more intense. Examples are things like going through a bereavement, but you have family support, losing a job, being at risk of losing housing, things like that. But if you have a support system in place, so you have friends, families, somebody you can talk to, any sort of support in place, that makes stress tolerable. It makes it hard to deal with, but it's not going to turn into something traumatic. So the third type of stress we have is toxic stress, and this stress is a big issue. So if it's something that's intensive or something that happens frequently, then this toxic stress can be part of the road to trauma. So an example of seeing things like domestic violence in the home, any sort of neglect or interference as a child, be that physical, emotionally, sexually, any of those abuses that happen as a child or as a teenager or as an adult, if they are repeated, they can easily become toxic stress, which can lead further to trauma. Part 3, I'm just going to talk through 3 parts of your brain and how the system processes things, just so that you're understanding when we get to step 4, which is looking at how stress can affect these places. So the first thing we're going to look at is your prefrontal cortex. So this is a part of your brain that looks at short-term memory, rational perspectives, speech and communication, cause and effect. It's your thinking part, it thinks about things, and it is the last part to form. This part of your brain doesn't form on average until women are 22 and men are 25, just the way your brain works. So that's your prefrontal cortex. Next part we want to look at is the amygdala. So the amygdala is your alarm centre. It tells you when things need attention. It is responsible for your flight, fight, freeze reactions. It assesses danger, and it is very, very much based around nature nurture. So how you've been brought up, the things you've experienced, the people you've interacted with, all of those will help frame how your amygdala, how the alarm centre responds to things. For example, if you've had a bereavement as a child and it was explained properly to you and you dealt with it and you had time to grieve and you experienced everything you needed to experience with support and love and positivity, then that's not necessarily going to affect you for the rest of your life. If you have a bereavement as a child, you don't have that support system, you don't get to grieve properly, you don't work through the processes you need to work to accept the loss, that can stick with you for life. Third part we're going to look at is the hippocampus. So this is your processing centre. It codifies every experience you have, every interaction you have, it's all there codified for you. It has a date stamp and a time stamp, and you know this is how and when it happened. This is the part that is the most disrupted by trauma, and this is why things like PTSD, dissociative disorders, have issues with when something happened, how something happened, where it happened, why it happened, because that codifying system and that processing of things in a, right, this was then, this was then, this was then, gets disrupted. So it's a really, really important part. So now that we've sort of got a bit of an understanding, and it is a very quick understanding, I'm not going into details, I'm not a brain specialist, I'm just telling you what I've learned in training as an educator and what I've learned through theory, support and counselling and therapy that I myself have been through. So I've looked at all these things, I've learned all these things, I've been through quite a lot of training for it, but I'm not a professional, I'm not 100% accurate with everything I say, so please just bear that in mind. So now we're going to have a look at toxic stress. So let's stay on toxic stress for a while. So from the same place, Joining Forces for Children, all the links for everything I mentioned will be in the description. So I'll read this quote because I found this quite interesting. A sustained activation of the body's stress response impacts many of the brain's vital systems. And it tells you what systems it impacts. And I'm just going to read through them because there are a few. So bear in mind that if you get this toxic stress response regularly, sustained activation, then these are the things it can impact. So you can have a decreased hippocampus volume, which can lead to anxiety, depression, impaired learning and impaired memory. You can have decreased grey matter in the prefrontal cortex, which is dealing with hypervigilance, and it can reduce your attention abilities. You can have a decreased reward response. So that means that you could experience a lack of joy. Even things that are happy and joyful, you will experience less joy with them. Then there is a disrupted signal between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And so that looks at understanding the relevance of situations. You can have then an increased ability in your salience networks, which is how you respond to these situations. Okay, we're going to have a look now at the fifth part about ACEs. Now, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. These are experiences that you have before the age of 18. So this goes from birth to 18. When I say childhood, I don't just mean pre-teen, I do mean all the way up to 18. So this whole 18 years that you experience, you can have adverse childhood experiences. So in the 90s, the information is coming from the CDC, I'll put the sites down below. So in the 90s, the CDC did a study with Kaiser, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that, and they identified 10 adverse childhood experiences. So you can have physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, those are the obvious. You can have physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness in the family, domestic violence, divorce, a family member in prison, and substance abuse. So those are the 10 ACEs that were identified by this study. So an example of just some of the experiences you may have within those. So you could have someone swear at you, insult you, put you down a lot, tell you negative things about yourself. Obviously any of the physical abuse experiences, same with the sexual abuse. So domestic violence, you could witness it from parent to parent, from parent to child, from sibling to sibling, from grandparent to parent. There are so many different experiences you can have of domestic violence. It can be something you experience yourself as well as something you witness. Any sort of substance abuse, so alcohol, any sort of illegal drugs, things like that, that can have an impact on your mental state, your reactions, and your ability to complete tasks effectively. Any sort of mental illness in the family, and that can range from very mild to very extreme. Remember we said that these traumas are subjective. So a child, you may have two children whose parents are both depressed, for example. For one child, that will be something to deal with. The family will support, they'll get help, it'll not be as traumatic. For another child, it could be, if they're a single parent and the parent is very depressed and not involved in the child's well-being and things, that can be really traumatic. So remember that it is subjective and you need to take it in context. Divorce or separation can be an adverse childhood experience, especially if they become messy. And I don't just mean like who gets what bit of the money or the building or what have you. I'm talking about the way people speak to children about previous partners, whether it's a parent or just, the last boyfriend or girlfriend that they saw. The way that the breakup happens in terms of dealing with a child can cause a problem. A household member in prison, this can be extended family, especially going to visit prisons could be quite traumatic for children, but also if, say, a parent or sibling or whoever is arrested in front of the child and taken to prison, that can be traumatic as well. Feeling unimportant, so being that person that nobody listens to, that nobody cares about. Following on from that, feeling that you're not loved or supported. As I mentioned with the previous experience, the child who's got support probably won't find it as traumatising as a child who experiences these things without a support network. You don't feel there's anyone to protect you, whether it's against perceived or real violence that's occurring in the home, in the school, in wherever. If you don't feel that you've got someone to protect you, especially as a child, that can be really, really traumatic. I will leave a link in the description so that you can fill out the ACEs test yourself. It is said that sort of most people have perhaps one or two adverse childhood experiences, and they can be fleeting and not really huge. For other children, they can be really, really intense. It is said that having 4 or more adverse childhood experiences can really cause a problem. One of the reasons these adverse childhood experiences or ACEs can be so traumatic and troubling for someone is we need to look at our limbic system and how it processes experiences and feelings. So it's kind of like if you go on a roller coaster, you're there watching in the queue, building up all this anxiety, this nervousness, this excitement. You can hear people screaming, you're like, oh, what's it going to be like? And you can get quite, especially as a child, you can get quite up emotional and excited about it. Then you get onto the roller coaster, it's your turn, you've got this, and then especially if it's one you've never been on before, or it's something that is specifically designed to have shock moments, you go through that and you get this huge rush of all the emotions. You then come off the roller coaster, and depending on your reaction, you laugh, you cry, you queue up to go again, because your limbic system flushes out that fear and stress and anxiety. So that becomes what we spoke of before, a tolerable or even positive stress. Some people really, really enjoy that build up, that emotion and that release. I love roller coasters. But every time I'm queuing up for one, I get butterflies in my stomach. Even though I know I've been on it before, I know exactly how it's going to go, I still get that butterfly feeling. But then you come off the roller coaster and I laugh. I tend to laugh a lot on roller coasters actually. So that your system flushes that out, so then it's not stored as traumatic experience. When you have a traumatic experience, you can get those same feelings, those same emotions, the fear, the anxiety, the nervousness, the stress, the worry, all of those things. And what happens when you have continued, sustained, regular experiences like this? You don't get the flush. So you stay permanently in this heightened state of awareness. And that causes everything you experience to be more traumatic. It also shows your body that there is no time to relax. So you are on alert the whole time. You see this a lot with people with dissociative disorders, with PTSD, with things like that that have a trauma basis. And it can be exhausting. Constantly looking over your shoulder, making sure you're safe, checking everything's okay. It's something that creates stress in of itself within the body, because it will raise stress hormones, it will raise levels of different things, and so your body learns a new normal, which is this heightened state. It can really, really impact the rest of your life and how you experience things. Because say you'll have a traumatic experience as a child, you deal with it, you do whatever you need to do, you get past it, you become an adult. You then go to a theme park with some friends, and as you're queuing up for a roller coaster, you get those same feelings. Because of the way your body has been trained to react, it is less likely that you'll be able to get on the roller coaster, come off and relax. You may not even be able to get on the roller coaster. Just flooding your system with those feelings and hormones again may be enough to cause quite a serious reaction. So that's why these are difficult and why they are something that everyone needs to be aware of. So what does this mean? Obviously that's a lot of information. So I'm just going to share with you some information that I have discovered and collated. It is said that 61% of the human population has at least one ACE. But if you have 4 or more, you're more likely to have a negative response to situations. So I've just thought about everything that I've heard of family vloggers, and I've created a list of experiences that I feel could meet an ACE if the child is susceptible to it. So remember, they are relative, they are taken in context, and they are subjective. So not every person is going to react and respond the same way to it, but these are just things that I've noticed. I'm not going to tell you which family or child or whatever it is. If you know, you know. If you don't know, then you can find out for yourself. But I'm not going to name names here. That's not the purpose of this video. So, behaviours that I feel could be viewed as traumatic. So, not having a door in your bedroom or bathroom, especially as a teenager. Sharing a room as a teenager when you don't need to financially. Being sent to behaviour or conversion camps. Discussing healthcare, specifically cancer, in front of a child, especially if you are very upset. That child is going to absorb everything you are showing emotionally, and it's going to absorb that trauma. Being made to redo and redo and redo videos until they are perfect, until they look the right way, until they are smiling at the right time. Links to that, being forced to smile on camera or do things that you don't want to do. You know, we have heard of children saying, I don't want to film this, I don't want you to post this, I don't want to do this, and yet they still do it. In the end, they are coerced into doing it one way or another. Again, parents sharing a video that the child's unhappy about, that links in the same way. Sharing deeply personal things such as bra shopping, periods, health scares, especially when that child or teenager has a peer group who will see that. And, you know, I remember being at school and, you know, if you did have a period, you didn't shout it out to the whole class. You kind of got embarrassed about it and didn't really tell anyone. And some of these children are having that entire experience shown to millions of people. I'd be traumatised. But again, subjective, relative. Linked to separation, a parent who is taking a child to see a biological parent. Things like, oh, I don't blame you for not wanting to go, it's okay, I wouldn't want to go either. It's only for a short time, don't worry, you'll be back with us soon. All of those things create negative connotations in the child's head with the person they're going to see. And it's deeply, deeply traumatic. You should not do that to your children. Whether you hate their other biological parent, that parent should be in their lives unless there is a serious reason that they shouldn't be. And if you have visitations, if you have times where they visit the opposite parent, you should be encouraging it, not saying, I don't blame her for not wanting to go. So linked to things like separation, bereavement is traumatic in itself. But taking a very young child and telling them on camera that a pet has died so you can film their reaction, telling children off, shouting at them, punishing them, all of that can be really traumatic to a child, especially once they're old enough to understand what the camera means, that other people are watching. Duct taping a thumb to stop thumb sucking. Rehoming an adopted child. Treating adopted children different to your biological children. Whether you think they're aware of it or not, children are very, very perceptive. They can sense when something is different. Whether they can verbalise it or not, they can sense it. I've worked with children who have additional needs for many years, quite a few years now, with children who have a diagnosis of being on the autistic spectrum. And they may not be able to verbalise or explain the situations, but they know when they're being treated differently to somebody else, based on my experience.
Hey guys, Editing LJ here. I apologise for the scratchy voice. I just wanted to add in here that I have recently watched Josh over at the Dad Challenge channel's video with a certain family vlogger and their house tour, and the stark difference between the boys' bedrooms. One full of personal effects, artwork, shelving, books, toys, everything homey, and one with a bed, and that's it. There was a reason given for it. I find that reason to be ridiculous, but regardless of what reason you have, children notice. So not only will the child realise that they are being treated as less than by the parents, but the other children will notice that that child is being treated as less than. And what can happen is, because those children mimic their parents, that's what children do, they start to treat that child as less than, and that can become a big cycle. The other children also start to realise that they are treated as better than, and that can cause problems in of itself. So I just wanted to add that little bit in here.
Being forced to do videos, things like that, clips, pictures when you're not feeling well. Medical tests and results shared on video. Birth of a new child. That can be traumatic to a child anyway, because you know, especially if they were an only child, you've then got the pregnancy and everyone's really excited and all the new stuff for the baby and all the excitement. And if you are in a family where that is brilliant, oh, you're going to be a big brother, you're going to be a big sister, and you're brought along with that, that's great. If you're not, and you are not necessarily pushed aside, but not viewed as much, not videoed as much, not having your life the way it was as much because there's a new baby, that can be very traumatic. Especially when you have, say, on video, and a child who's old enough to understand the views of YouTube, things like that, as they start getting to that sort of age, and they can see, well, I did a video that had this many, but the baby had this many, that can be quite challenging and traumatic for a child as well. Neglect. I'm going to say this, and I fully stand by my statement I said in my first video. Parents knowing that there are playlists created by maps, by predators, I'm saying it like that so it doesn't get flagged, if you know that's there and you don't do anything about it, that's neglect. I'm sorry, it is. You're neglecting to keep your child safe. Baiting predators and stalkers, calling them out, being really in your face about it. That's especially when you've mentioned previously that you've had stalkers and things like that. Sharing young girls' dance gymnastics. Take the videos, keep them for your experience and your memories, fine, but don't put them onto places where people you know are looking at them for nefarious reasons. Cold showers as a punishment. Doing over the top pranks because it's funny on camera. Parents taking medications such as Adderall, things like that, that's still a substance that they are taking that could impact the way they do it, especially if it becomes an abusive situation where they're abusing medication. Calling the police to your house, either calling the police because something has happened to you or because someone has called the police on you. Repeated exposure to the police could end up being very traumatic for a child. And then having any stalkers or robbers or things like this that you talk about openly and in front of the children. So those are just a few things that I have collated. And the reason this interests me and affects me and worries me so much is because there are lifelong risks of this kind of toxic stress. So I'll read you this because I found this quite interesting. Toxic stress affects children as they grow older and leads to many common health and behavioural issues later in life. The CDC and Kaiser ACE study found adults with an ACE score of 4 or more significantly greater risk for many behavioural, physical and mental health issues later in life. And I've just got a few of those to give you an example. So, possible negative responses to this toxic stress. Smoking, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, whether it's prescription or illicit, missing work, getting STDs, teen pregnancy, dealing with violence from a partner and thinking it's normal, severe obesity, severe eating disorders, suicide attempts, depression, diabetes and cancer. Because of the way your body processes hormones, you are more at risk of getting cancer or diabetes. Heart disease, similar thing. Liver disease. Broken bones because you want the rush, the adrenaline, the excitement of a situation that leads to it. And chronic lung disease. So it's also said genes are the blueprint that provide instructions for making proteins in our bodies. All processes that make us human require these proteins and help define who we are. Epigenetics describes the way that our genes are turned on and off, whether a specific gene is used or not. This is the bit. We know that what we experience in life changes our epigenetic profile. Or in other words, life experience changes our genes, really gets under our skin. Not only does this affect the individual, the way our bodies respond to stress can pass from one generation to the next through our genes. So this could mean that it not only affects the generation of children that are experiencing it now, but their children and possibly future generations, because your genes are adapted, your epigenetic profile is changed because of these experiences, and you can pass that on to your children. So, the reason that this is so important to me, as I touched on in the first video, I did not have a good childhood. And there were many issues that I had. So that, despite being a very different situation, I'm not putting these family vlogs in the same situation. However, I had a very high score on my ACEs, and I wonder how many these children have. Again, relative, subjective. The other reason it impacts me so is if you think about child stars who go on to have some of these problems, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, diabetes, smoking, STDs, pregnancy, all of those things happen because these children are experiencing things they shouldn't be experiencing at that age. The other issue of privacy. These children deserve a childhood where they can grow up in private, deal with what they need to deal with, becoming a teenager, dealing with all those things that happen that are hard enough as it is, without the world watching. Because it just adds this pressure, this stress to everything they do. The playlists that have been not discovered by, but discussed by Josh on the Dad Challenge Dad Challenge podcast scare me, because these people can identify where certain families live, and if they are sharing playlists of these children doing things that should be private, I don't know how you can know that as a parent and not do anything about it. I also worry for the state of children in terms of the neglect. If there is a situation where they're doing a certain video, you've seen, well, when I need to do this, I just give my child sweets, stick them in front of the TV, or something along those lines. When the camera and the vlogging and YouTube and your work, in fact, let me rephrase that. When your work takes over your life, you start to neglect your children. This could be a very regular job, board member, CEO of a company, what have you. But if you start working 16, 17, 18-hour days, you cannot look after your child effectively. They need far more of your time and energy. Same thing goes with these. When the camera, when the views, when the brand deals, when the money, when the vlog is more important than your child, that's neglect, and that is not fair. So thank you for sticking with me. If you've made it this far, I do really appreciate it. Again, I am not a mental health professional, I'm not an ACEs professional, I'm not, saying that I am the be-all and end-all in this type of situation. However, I have done the training previously. I've been on several training courses about trauma, abuse, things like that, because I was training to become safeguarding. That's my aim, to be the safeguarding person in schools to look after children if there are situations that need support. That's my aim. So I've been on a fair few training courses, and as I mentioned, I do have experience of a less than conventional childhood. And all I want for these kids is a normal childhood. They deserve the peace, the quiet, the attention from their parents, not the attention from millions of people worldwide. And I just think that we need to make this change to protect those children, and has been proven, possibly generations to come. We don't have any data on this, we don't have experience. This really is the first generation growing up with this. There are a few who are now adults who started YouTube very young and have built up from that, but I worry about them as well. I think any life where you are constantly in front of the camera is traumatic. I've only just started this channel to talk about things with my health, and in the process of filming things, I was like, oh, I feel awful, I should really film this. Actually, no, I shouldn't. I should take the time, I should look after myself, I should do the self-care, then perhaps I can film another day. And I think when you get to a certain point, the upper echelon of having millions of viewers, having hundreds of thousands of viewers, getting that income regularly, a lot of things like care, health, privacy get shunted away, because the more you share, the more money you make. And if you're an adult making that decision, fine. I think you're daft, but fine. But when you make that decision for a child, that's not okay. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. That's why this is so important to me, and yeah, that's what I have to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and your thoughts on family vlogging in general. If you leave me a comment down in the description, I'll get back to you. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Loopy love.